Thank you for extending this invitation to me to spend some time with you in this observance and commemoration and remembrance of the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is meet and right so to do. It is very appropriate that we should be gathered to remember his teachings as they reflect the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, and to dare to continue to live them for such a time as this. I'm actually recording this on Monday before you will see it, which follows the Wednesday, the Feast of the Epiphany, January 6th, where we saw the supreme symbol of our democracy, of the democratic way of government, violated in an attempt to overthrow it. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the work you have continued to do, certainly since 1963, when Dr. King addressed you. I want to thank you for continuing that work, for the work that you've done in service to others, for the work that you've done trying to bring about a decent and humane society for us all, the work that you have done in seeking to overcome the realities of racism in our midst, your participation in things like Sacred Ground, and your witness to the whole church, and for your being the host church for our first Evangelism Matters gathering. I thank your clergy. I thank you, the people of St. Paul's Church, and thank your bishop, my friend, Bishop Mark Hollingsworth. Dr. King spoke to you in 1963, and I had an opportunity to read his words and address a few months before the March on Washington, in the midst and in the context of the struggle in Birmingham, Alabama. We speak now in the context in which the very democracy that we love is in danger. I'm not given by nature to hyperbole or exaggeration, preacher though I am. I'm very cautious and judicious about words like that. And yet, after what we saw last Wednesday, those words are not an exaggeration. I believe the democracy will hold, but it is going to require effort by us all. And I believe that the issue at stake is not simply a matter of our democracy here in the United States. It is a question of whether or not we as human beings can summon the capacity to learn how to live together, not simply as individualized collections of self-interest, not simply as unenlightened self-interest groups, but as Dr. King said over and over again, beginning about mid-1965 or 6, we will either learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish together as fools. The choice is ours, chaos or community. It was at that time that he began to use slightly different language, speaking less of the American dream and more of the choice that the nation must make between the dream and the nightmare. By 1967, he published his last book that was titled, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? He did so at one of those defining moments in this country's story. The Vietnam War was raging. There were protests in our street. The nation was bitterly divided. A divisive election would happen soon. There had been race riots of the poor crying out in our cities. We had seen American cities burn. I can actually remember in my mind seeing the city of Buffalo, where I grew up. I can see it ablazed in my mind even now. America was burning and torn apart. And it was then that he said over and over again and published the book with the title, Where Do We Go From Here? I've realized something. Dr. King realized that in moments of great danger to a culture and society, a choice must be made. Moments of danger are moments of decision. When each person, when a people collectively, when we as a nation must decide, where will we go from here? Chaos, the abyss, the nightmare, or community? The beloved community. Whereas the old slaves used to say, there's plenty of good room for all of God's children. That is the reality that we are faced with. And the truth is the decision must be made on a conviction and a belief that, as James Russell Lowell said in that poem from the 19th century, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet the scaffold it sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. Someone must make a decision and a commitment and a conviction to believe that, as Dr. King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it is bent toward justice. Love will win. Justice will happen. The right is might, not might makes right. And people must make a decision. We must make a decision. Where do we go from here? The chaos of the nightmare, or the beloved community of our hope? I'm very aware that it is so easy to dismiss the words love and justice and compassion and goodness, dismiss them as idealistic, utopian visions that sound nice, but that have no foundation in reality. And yet, just this past Wednesday, we have seen the abyss. We have seen the outpouring of the nightmare. We have seen the opposite, the alternative to living ways of love, compassion, justice, and goodness and kindness. The alternatives are unthinkable and ultimately undoable. Do not give up on that longed for prayer that Jesus taught us to say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is a moment of decision, as it was, to be sure, even in 1963. This is a moment of decision, as it was in 1967. It is a moment of decision, as it was in 1865 when Abe Lincoln addressed the nation in his second inaugural address. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? There's a passage in the New Testament that I've been looking at this week that really has helped me to frame this. It comes from the 5th chapter of John's Gospel. There's a man who has been paralyzed for life, and he lays every day by the pool of Bethsaida in hopes that someone will come along to put him in the pool, because that pool was believed to be like Lourdes, like the waters, healing waters of Lourdes in France, where sometimes people could get healed or at least feel better. And he laid there every day hoping somebody would come along and help him. And very often, obviously, someone probably did. This one particular day, no one had. And he was laying by the side of the water, and Jesus came along. And instead of Jesus just simply saying, let me help you into the pool, instead of Jesus just doing that for him, if you look at John chapter 5 carefully, Jesus says to him, do you want to be made well? Jesus was daring him, challenging him to summon the healing powers that were within him, in his spirit, in his decision to be healed, and then to bring that in partnership with whatever God was doing in the waters for him to find the way to be healed. And the man said, yes, I want to be healed. And the story goes on. He is eventually healed. Jesus realized that the path to healing, the path to wholeness, the road to reconciliation, the road to becoming the beloved community begins with a decision. It is a fork in the road, a Robert Frost moment where one must decide which road to take. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? I, like you, choose community. And I'm a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, his teachings, his spirit, his life. I'm a follower of Jesus because I believe that he has shown us the way to beloved community. It is not easy. It is the way of the cross. It is the way of love, unselfish, sacrificial love. And it is the way of life. So where shall we go from here? What shall we do? First, I believe we've got to humble ourselves. There's that passage in 2 Chronicles, if my people will humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways, then I will heal their land. I believe we've got to humble ourselves. And I don't mean in self-abasement. I mean, humble ourselves before God and humble ourselves before each other, being humble enough to learn. I had a teacher who used to say, no one learns anything when they are in the posture of arrogance. Learning can only happen in the posture of humility. America, we must learn from others who have traveled this way before. I would submit that we have much to learn from Archbishop Desmond Tutu, from the late Nelson Mandela, from the people of South Africa, who learned from a dangerous and torturous history, learned from their own struggle, and averted a civil war by making a decision between chaos and community. And at the heart of that work and decision was the willingness to engage the hard and difficult work of truth and reconciliation. Painful truths had to be faced, not to put down, but ultimately to build up. And in so doing, they helped to move forward and avoid a bloodbath. They're still a work in progress, but we have much to learn from them. For that was the hard work of love, seeking truth, leading to reconciliation. Secondly, I want to suggest that we We need a revolution of relationships in our country. Let me unpack that just a bit. We have seen that there is nothing wrong with differences. There's nothing wrong with diversity. In fact, diversity and differences create the context for the thriving of a healthy democracy. That from many different people and varieties, with all of their gifts and their givens, with all of that, they can create a unity that is not mere uniformity, but that is a diversity and unity at the same time. And yet, when differences become divisive, that is a formula for destruction. We have moved to a point where the differences among us are divisive and dangerous. Not, I suspect, for the vast majority of us, but for far too many. And when those differences and divisions are allowed to fester, that is a formula for the words that Abraham Lincoln spoke before the Civil War, quoting the words of Jesus of Nazareth in the New Testament. When Lincoln said at his nominating convention, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." When divisions begin to rule, destruction is around the corner. One of the ways that divisions are overcome is by the intentional cultivating of relationships across differences. I am suggesting that we must work intentionally at working in relationship, not for the purpose of convincing somebody to believe what I believe, not for the purpose of converting somebody, but for the purpose of being in relationship with someone else who is a fellow child of God, created in the image and likeness of God, and getting to know them as your brother, your sister, your sibling. There are a number of ways to do that, a number of programs that are beginning to bubble up to help us in doing that. You can simply Google Braver Angels, for example, a group of people who have come together across the political spectrum to find ways for people who hold different political perspectives and different ideologies even to be in dialogue and relationship. Google Braver Angels. You can go to the Episcopal Church website, and our Office of Government Relations has developed a full curriculum called Lord, Make Me an Instrument of Your Peace. And it uses the language of civil discourse, but it's deeper than that. It is a design, a program that can help groups of people engage in real life-giving conversations and relationships that can foster something close to beloved community. There's another program called Becoming Beloved Community, which engages our racial differences, but not simply racial differences and struggles. It helps to provide a framework, a design, if you will, a kind of rule of life, a spiritual rule of life for how do you become an instrument of becoming beloved community. And lastly, during the season of our election, I asked our staff to begin work on a design that could help churches and individuals and congregations become instruments of becoming one people from many. And that curriculum is now on the Episcopal Church website under the title, From Many, One. That comes from the Latin phrase, e pluribus unum. Truth and reconciliation, cultivation of relationships across difference. And thirdly, and lastly, we need a revolution of values, a revolution and a revival of the shared values that we hold. I remember some years ago reading a book many of you probably read, Robert Fulgram's book, Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And it's a wonderful book about kind of some of the shared cultural values that we hold, certainly in this country, but they're shared around the world. But he locates them in terms of what he learned in kindergarten. And here's the list that he comes up with. First, share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. Clean up your own mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Say sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. Flush. And when you go out into the world, watch out for traffic. Hold each other's hands and stick together. Those are just shared human values of common decency. And yet we must lift them up again. That these are also values of humanity. But you can go beyond those. We must have a revival of a commitment to the values that we share. There's a lot that we differ on. We have different political philosophies, different religious traditions, different ways of understanding life. But there are some shared values that we hold in these United States. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We have some shared values. 77 years ago, our forefathers brought upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. My friends, we have some shared values. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible. Listen to this, with liberty and justice for all. We have some shared values. We must have a revival of those values, a reclaiming of those values. No apology for them. Daring to live them. And lastly, I remember when I was in the 5th grade, Miss Lenny's 5th grade class at public school number 76 in Buffalo, New York. And Miss Lenny's 5th grade, believe it or not, that was the year there had been some kind of integration plan. And so we left what was a predominantly black school across Main Street, Buffalo. And we went to public school 76, which was actually in an Italian neighborhood. And it was part of a desegregation pattern. And so there, a group of us were in Miss Lenny's 5th grade class. The year was 1963. The same year that Dr. King addressed St. Paul's Church. We were coloring this little drawing of the Great Seal of the United States. And you'll remember on the Great Seal, there's the eagle with holding olive branches here. And arrows here. And then above the eagle, written in Latin, the words E pluribus unum, from many, one. The founders wisely chose that as the motto of the United States of America, E pluribus unum, from many, one. A few months ago, I got curious about that Latin phrase and its origin, and I did a little research. I knew that the founders were enamored and learned much from the classics, from the political philosophies of the Greeks and Romans. But I discovered that that phrase, E pluribus unum, from many, one, probably had its origin in the writings of Cicero in the time of the Roman Republic. And Cicero said this, which is probably the origin of the phrase. When each person loves the other as much as he loves himself, it makes one out of many possible. When each person loves the other as much as he loves himself, it makes one out of many possible. One out of many, e pluribus, the motto of the democracy that is the United States. And the key to it is unselfish, sacrificial love that seeks the good of others as well as the self. And that will save our democracy. Cicero said it. Jesus said it. Moses said it. God said it. The God who the Bible says is love has been trying to tell us that love is the way to save all of humanity. So though I began on a word somewhat despairing, let us end on a word of hope and conviction. To be sure, these are dangerous times, but we have a God who the Bible says is love, and love will not be defeated. As Harry Emerson Fosdick said in his great hymn, God of Grace and God of Glory, may God grant us wisdom and grant us courage, the courage to love for the living of these days, and democracy will be possible. So as the old slaves used to say, walk together, children. And don't you get weary, because there's a great camp meeting in the promised land. There surely is. Thank you. God bless you. And may God hold us all in those almighty hands of love.